Good morning, family. What is post-Majuu stress disorder? Stay with me till the end for the answers. Today, I want to treat you to the final leg of our journey from Los Angeles International Airport to Karating. We arrived yesterday safely, and we are looking forward to an incredible holiday season, spending some quality time with family, as we've always done every year. Now, as you can hear, my voice is probably a little raspy. I caught something nasty as I was traveling, and I'm slowly working my way to better health. Oh, and by the way, that is an amazing fan that I met at the airport. She's from the UK, and we've actually turned to be really good friends. One of my really incredible supporters. We spent some really good time with them at the airport before I headed back to Karating. So anyway, I apologize if my voice is not as clear as it usually is. So normally my sisters, the ones that you see in this video, come to meet me at the airport. Of course, many of you already know they are at Dani Airport. They come and meet me whenever I land, and more often than not, I never leave the airport. I land usually around 5 a.m. in the morning and hop onto the next flight to Kisumu. And part of it is because for me, Nairobi is so not my world. Nairobi is such a foreign world. I really know very little about Nairobi, and it gives me little joy. So I spend as little time as possible in Nairobi. So this flight that I'm about to take from Nairobi to Kisumu, the jumbo jet flight, is the only flight usually that I really look forward to. In part because the flight is the final leg of our 22 plus hour trip from California to Karating. And it conjures very fond memories, especially when we are about to land in the Kisumu airport, looking at the plains and the rivers and the lake. I just feel really good looking at Kisumu from above when I'm about to land. So I don't care for flying, but this is the only flight that I usually look forward to. So join me. PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, is actually a real medical condition. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about post-Majuu stress disorder. That's different from PTSD. So PTSD is actually a real medical condition that many people battle, and I have very little knowledge or experience with it. So I would not say much about it in today's video. So I have to make sure I'm clear on that. And then just as a disclaimer too, I don't want to make light of such a serious medical issue. So whenever I'm sort of quote unquote corrupting that term and creating something else, I'm not making light of PTSD. I recognize how serious it is, and I've seen a few people with it. It's no joke, and if you're one of those people, I hope you get help. However, sometimes I think Kenyans who have lived overseas come back with what I'm going to describe in this video as post-Majuu stress disorder. If you are not Kenyan, or if you don't speak Kenyanese, the word Majuu is a term that often means the same thing as diaspora. So when you move abroad, then they say you've gone to Majuu, or when you're in diaspora, then they call you to a Majuu. So that is a very common term for those who speak Kenyanese. Anyway, many of you already know that living in diaspora comes with its own set of joys and traumas, both of which leave lasting impressions on most of us, if not all of us. And these experiences really define who we are when we come back. And so in this video, I want to talk to you about what to me presents as potential indicators of trauma linked to living away from home, and especially living in relatively hostile diaspora countries. I use the term post-Majuu stress disorder again in jest, but some of what I'm about to say really is very serious and may require professional advice. So while it sounds like I'm joking, some of the things are very serious and may really require medical support. And so if you're one person who is dealing with some of the things I'm about to mention, I hope you get some help. Now, of course, this help would not come from me, pretty much because I'm not qualified to offer medical advice on anything. I'm a doctor, but not a doctor of medicine. So I don't offer medical advice. I simply point to things that I observe. So keep in mind that this is just coming from the streets, nothing that I've read about, but just observations from the people that I live with. Because again, much of what I report in my channel are things that I hear from my people, things I observe in my community, and I simply report what that is. So don't quote me if something does not sound correct, and if I'm incorrect, feel free to correct me in the comment section. Oh, and before I go too far, if you're joining us for the first time, in this channel we typically talk about everything about diaspora folks, those who are returning, because my family is working our way back to Kenya. We've lived in diaspora for many, many years, and now we are taking serious steps to come back to Kenya permanently. And so because we've not fully transitioned, we still end up going back and forth. Anyway, before I share details about trauma, I just want to give you examples of things or situations that Kenyans or Africans survive in diaspora, and specifically things that I know often change who we are. And there's almost an unlimited list of events that I can talk about, but I'm only going to select about 10 things that are fairly common, almost regardless of the country a person lives in. Because I hear the same things in Australia, I hear them in the United Kingdom, I hear them in America, and many, many other countries. It's even worse in some of these Asian and Arab countries. So the first thing that a lot of us are introduced to in diaspora is racism. And just so you know, if you're not familiar with Kenya, the average Kenyan really does not know what racism is, especially people who don't live around Indians, Arabs, Chinese, or white folks. People like me who grew up in small villages where everybody's black and there's no place you mix with other folks, we don't know what racism is at all. And a lot of us meet racism for the first time in diaspora. I remember when I first moved to America, my brother and I were driving from Pittsburgh to Indiana. And then we got lost. And at the time, of course, there were no GPSs. We got lost, and so we pulled into a Walmart to ask for directions. And as soon as we moved closer to some white women who were standing out in the parking lot, as soon as they saw us, these two, I think there were 3 white women, simply ran into Walmart. And I'd just come from Kenya. So at that point, I'm wondering, what's going on? Why would they run away from us? So a lot of us who live in villages really have no idea what racism is, whether the obvious, the overt racism or the subtle racism. So when we move to diaspora where we are often the minority, that is when we get to experience racism. And this can have a lasting impression. And then, of course, the sense of betrayal. I'm not saying betrayal is unique to diaspora. It happens everywhere. But a lot of us come to diaspora with a lot of innocence, and we are very trusting. So some of us, for the first time, experience real betrayal. I've had a case of a friend of mine whose neighbor, a Kenyan, actually impregnated his wife. Another case where another Kenyan too took somebody's identity and opened up credit cards in their names. Excuse me. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of identity theft. When you trust people with your documents and then they do stuff like that, it's really debilitating. I've also had cases where Africans report each other to immigration. It's very rare, but it happens. And just so I'm clear, this is not unique to Kenyans. It happens everywhere. But when we experience serious betrayal, it really does change who we are. And then, of course, accidents. And I'm talking about road accidents. Again, most of us who grew up in the village don't drive, at least, because for me, I learned how to drive. I never had a license, but I was driving in Kenya, not my car. But then the first time we actually are driving happens in diaspora. And then when we have accidents, then the trauma follows. I know of a friend of mine whose mom smashed a car in America. And since then, she has never driven at all, not in the US and not in Kenya. So yes, road accidents, for some of us, we first experienced those kinds of things in diaspora. And then you're talking about problems with child support and families breaking up, where for the first time you find a person paying astronomical amounts in child supports in ways that really destroys a person's life. Then you have custody issues where the man and the woman is fighting for the kid and all that. You have some really, really nasty divorce that I've seen in Kenyan families. And those things can really, really leave an impression on folks. And I've seen this among some of my friends. Then when you talk about things such as job loss, uh, losing your job is always a tough experience, whether you're in Kenya or in diaspora. But in diaspora, it takes a whole different dimension, because at home, you may not have a job and you live in the village, you're not paying rent, you don't have any bills, and you're just relatively okay. In diaspora, it doesn't work like that. And Americans really have a terrible way of firing people. Oftentimes, I hear people talk about realizing that they can't even log into the system. Like one morning you wake up and then you try to, oh, and by the way, I just found out in this flight that they actually give extension seat belts in Kenyan flights. I'd never seen that. That is a very common thing in America, but not in Kenya. Anyway, let me not get distracted. So Americans have a terrible way of firing folks. So you realize you wake up in the morning and you can't log into your work system. And that is a signal that you've been fired. In fact, sometimes I've seen folks being escorted out of the building with security, even in cases where the person has not done anything wrong. These people have a terrible way of firing people, when in fact the employers themselves require employees to give them 2 weeks notice before they exit. But when it's the employers cutting you off, they just do it in the most ruthless ways. So job loss in the way they do it in America can really be traumatic. In Kenya, especially if you're a government employee, there's lots of recourse to address things like that. In America, especially if you live in conservative states, they would fire you for no reason at any time, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that can be really traumatic. Then you have trauma related to parenting in America. And this is a big, big topic that I think I'll mostly cover in a separate video. But in any case, many of us, while parenting in Kenya, have, in my view, such an easy time in Kenya, because oftentimes we can afford maids, you've got relatives, and so there's a lot of help around parenting. And that's the kind of world that I grew up in. And back in the 80s and 90s, every single adult in the neighborhood was responsible for the welfare of kids. So if a neighbor found you doing something wrong somewhere, they would absolutely, quote unquote, take care of you correctly. And then you beg them not to tell your parents, which again, of course, they're going to tell your parents, and you're going to get a whooping again the second time. Everybody was responsible. I remember one time I fell sick. I went to school sick. I was told not to go to school. I was sick, but I forced myself, went to school. And then it became too much. So the teacher asked me to go home. On my way back, I actually could not even see. And so I slept on the side of the road. Some random person just picked me up and took me all the way to our home. Another time, my brother and I, we used to play a lot and would get all kinds of accidents. If anybody was cut, like my brother, one time he really had a nasty wound on his leg while jumping over a fence. And when the neighbor saw that, he just grabbed him, took him to the hospital. And I had the same thing too. When I fell from, I actually climbed a pawpaw tree, which again, if you know what I'm talking about, that is a terrible idea. So I fell from the pawpaw tree onto a barbed wire and had a very big gash on my leg. When I landed down, I could barely walk. And it was a neighbor that took me to the hospital and just came back and informed my mom. So the community was always around. Now, I know in Kenya today, that's different. In the 80s, that was the case, but that's different. So those who are used to that type of parenting in Kenya find it very difficult parenting once they move to diaspora, because those systems are no longer there. And then, of course, the kids are taught differently. Kids sort of have a lot more freedom than they did back in Kenya. They're taught they now have a voice for themselves. They can call 911. I've seen kids calling 911 with their parents and things not working out too well. Oh, and by the way, I'm also inspecting the compound. I'm looking at fruits. There's lots of fruits that have just popped up. And I was only gone for a few weeks. But what's disappointing is that this particular pawpaw tree here, I think is male. So in the next week or so, I'm going to perform a gender reassignment surgery to change it. And I'm not joking. You can actually do that on pawpaw. If you don't believe me, look it up on YouTube. You'll see how to do a gender reassignment surgery on pawpaw to change it from male to female, because the male one does not produce fruits. So I'm going to do that. I realize now I have a lot of bananas. I have a lot of pawpaws. And this is actually my favorite. We call them mapera. Mapera should be guava, I believe. Yeah. So we've got lots of guava, And I'm really excited to come and find tons of these. My only challenge with them is that the folks that usually work for us and guests that come in often raid my fruits all the time. I mean, I don't mind it. It's only that sometimes I see some really juicy mapera hoping to pick it up the next day. But by the time I get here, it's already taken. But it's all good. It's all good. We plant this thing so everybody can enjoy. So anyway, besides the trauma with parenting, then you're looking at things such as exploitation, where for the first time people get exploited in very serious ways. I had a case where a friend would take another friend's paycheck every single time, lying to them in some kind of ways. And then, of course, you have really odd neighbors in America. In Kenya, you pretty much know every neighbor around you and you talk to people all the time, and especially in the village. In America, like where I live, I know most of my neighbors, but there's some that I don't know. They keep to themselves. They don't even talk to you. You just pass each other. And some of them are very anal about small things like cutting grass, garage doors, and all that. And so they will always give you problems. And it's even worse when you have what they call the HOA in America, Homeowners Association. Those guys are crazy. So for us, we knew we would not buy a home in a place with a HOA. So yes, the neighbors that we often experience in America can be really different. So besides that, the religion also comes in. People have had different traumatic experiences around religion. So if you were to ask, how do these things change us before we come home? Let me give you a list. Number one, anxiety. Many of us develop serious anxiety or mental health illness, including depression. So these are things that we never had when we were in Kenya. But now that you move to diaspora and you've experienced all of that, you start having serious anxiety, stress, and mental health issues. The second thing that I noticed happened to most of us is insomnia. I never knew that people could struggle with sleep until I came to America. That yes, a lot of people have to take medication just to fall asleep. Something I never saw in Kenya at the time. And then one other common thing is that once we've gone through all this, we tend to develop very superficial relationships. We are very comfortable with very surface level relationships, where you talk to somebody, you smile, and you tell them, good to meet you, when you really don't mean it. Or you smile the way Americans like smiling, but that smile is very empty behind it. Many of us really become very comfortable with developing very superficial relationships. And then we lose trust. After all these experiences, we become very, very skeptical of anything. In fact, in my tongue, there's a word called ikichuriakija. And that often means your antenna is up all the time. And you are always suspicious. Even when people are doing something with good intention, we are always suspicious. So trust becomes a challenge for many of us. And then little sense of security related to trust. Negative Nancy, where a lot of us, you get to this mode where something happens and you start looking at just what would go wrong, the negative part, instead of looking at life from a positive end. And then, of course, after going through these experiences, some of us choose not to drive when we come back. And then we develop this heightened sense of individualism, where you want to do things by yourself, for yourself. When we were growing up, most of us were always taught to put the group first. But you live in America for a while, you really develop that sense of me. The me world is very, very strong. And so when we come back home, it's very difficult to tame it. We also tend to get very detached from family because we've gone for so long and those bonds kind of fade away. And so that detachment is a very common thing. I'm not as tight as I used to be with my cousins. But in my part, I honestly think it's not because of me. Now, I won't talk about it today, but I don't believe it's because of me. And then some people just choose not to have kids. After going through all of that, like let's say you've gone through child custody and all that stuff, when they get married again, they're like, no, I do not want to have kids at all. So in all, I want to conclude by saying there are more good people on earth than there are bad people. And in fact, if this was not true, the earth would be almost inhabitable. So just because you have been character developed, just because you've gone through trauma doesn't mean you should transfer your pain onto other people. So I hope we are self-reflective enough to notice if we've gone through pain and we are not really causing other people pain because we are in pain. So if you are suffering from any of these things I've mentioned, please seek professional help. If you're a survivor of trauma, there's all kinds of supports that are available that I hope you get. There are a lot of people who have insomnia, lack of sleeplessness, stress, depression. There is care available. Please seek care. Well, I also hope that folks in Kenya are more understanding of diasporans, given what I just shared. Because some people just find us odd when we come back, and you just never know why that is. Well, this was all I could say about this, and I will see you in the next. Thank you. Bye.